Corporate culture is totally white supremacy culture. And that's why when I did my dissertation on the unwritten rules of work for people from working class backgrounds, I did a second paper on if there were unwritten rules that upheld the white supremacy culture framework. And you bet I did find that they did. I normally talk on here about unwritten rules I didn't know based on my background. However, in this video, I'm going to tell you about times I had to realize unwritten rules for somebody else that were different from me. I'm Dr. Anna Kalschmidt. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and I research the unwritten rules of work for people from working class backgrounds. When I first learned about the white supremacy culture framework, I was not only in the initial phases of planning my dissertation, but I was also managing a couple hundred people across the nation. And I was relatively new to the organization, but they had had a lot of issues. They had 50% turnover. And of course, an unwritten rule is indirect communication, so nobody would really tell me what the problem was. Until finally, it also exploded in the training room when a lot of the employees told me that they thought there was a racist culture in the organization. And I did not see it. I did not understand what it was, but I took myself to an external training that unfortunately was not by the organization. I went to it after hours just to try to figure out what it was. And that's where I learned about white supremacy culture. And it changed my life. And it was thinking of the same concepts that I already was for my dissertation, but in a different lens. Things like, what are those unwritten things that have these huge impacts? A lot of white people get triggered by the word white supremacy and are like, why are you calling me this? I don't have a white hood on. But somebody doesn't just wake up and put a hood on. There are things that build to get to that point. And maybe they never reach that tippy top of the pyramid, but the base of the pyramid is still there. And the base of that pyramid is things like making everything an emergency and never saying you have time to learn about the impact of the decisions you make because you just don't have time. Everything's too urgent. Of expecting some people to be perfect and other people who are more like you to not be perfect. And you reward people who are more like you, even if they're not that great, which we all have that bias. We all have similarity bias. Of having an either or mentality of you're either with me or you're against me, or we do A or Z, and there's no in between. And part of that either or mentality is the people not understanding that white supremacy is a culture, and it can actually be performed by people who aren't white, and it can impact people who are white, but it is not to the same degree. Poison is poison, but it is designed to hurt people who aren't white the most. And people who aren't white who perpetrate it are usually trying to do so to fit in or to protect themselves. So learning this helped me examine a lot of what I thought was just normal in American work culture, having been there my whole life. And so I came back to the organization and started including people more in decision making wherever I had possible. I wasn't an executive. I was pretty high manager, but I wasn't an executive. Of having conversations with my executives about this, of pausing and not getting into the rush as much as I felt like my leadership expected me to make sure the decisions we made, that we considered how they impacted people differently, that we took steps to mitigate harm. Because, for example, part of their job of the people complaining involved interactions with other people, and sometimes they would be put with people who are really racist, and it was really traumatic for them to be in those interactions, and that we needed to have a way to not put them in those situations, and that if they, without any signal, were put in a situation like that we had a way to get them out immediately, that we encourage them to collaborate and have teamwork and not undercut each other at every twist and turn. And it went a long way in that, it was never a perfect work environment, but you could see a measurable difference in, like, our turnover went down by 30%, which I think speaks to that it was a less miserable place to work. Yeah, these things are very real, and they're just heavily normalized, and they actually work against a lot of business incentives, but they keep the same people in power.